I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this January the 26th, 2020. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. As always, your local weather information, watches, warnings, and advisories for your part of Alaska can be found with just a simple touch of the phone there, 1-800-472-0391. It works on your mobile device. It works on your landline there. Be sure and write down the numbers as you're dialing in. It'll make your experience go a little bit faster. You don't have to wait for every one of those prompts to be read out for you. So just type in those numbers as you go. Weather.gov/Alaska is your source to 24-hour information online. You can look at your local weather forecast information, satellite, radar, and certainly local weather observations the closest to you. You can check your forecast there as well as get river and sea ice information, as well as the latest information about an earthquake that may have occurred near you using tsunami.gov. If you can't find what you're looking for, please do let me know. david.snyder@noaa.gov is my way to serve you. You can contact me there. I'd love to see your pictures of your part of Alaska anytime as well. Let's take a look at the Northern Hemisphere. This is a plot of the thickness of the atmosphere. It's something that meteorologists use on a daily basis to kind of gauge how the big weather patterns are moving around the globe. And as they do, it affects the weather where we live and where you live. And if you look at the map here, here's Alaska, here is the Aleutians stretching off to the west, and southeastern Alaska right here. The lower 48, Canada, Mexico, and the equator showing up here. The big blue, of course, is significant. That's the North Pole, and that big cold sticking down like a tongue into Alaska and even parts of North America and the Northeast is significant. In this January, that cold really hasn't moved very much. And you're saying, yeah, it's Alaska, it's January, it should be cold. And you're absolutely right. However, it has been a while since we've had significant cold like this stick around, maybe as long as since 2012. And before that, it used to have a little bit more of a recurrence as a normal kind of factor. So here we are. This is January 2020, and a good chunk of the month has looked like this over Alaska. Now, we can also gauge this a different way. If we look down at the surface of the Earth, we can say, well, how unusual are these temperatures today? And if we use a tool here called climatereanalyzer.org, and this is from our friends at the University of Maine, pretty cool stuff. You can check this out too if you want. These maps are made every single day, and you see one of the places where it is a little bit colder than normal, maybe even a lot. We're talking about temperatures that are in the 10 to 20 degree below the average mark right now. This is all in degrees Celsius if you're keeping track. All of that is showing up as much colder than normal here across Alaska, while a large part of Canada and the lower 48 is showing up on the screen there as much warmer than average. And that's just today, of course. So it's important to understand how our weather is in comparison to what is considered normal or average, and certainly this weather pattern in the last couple of weeks has been on the colder side of that, but it is, again, also January in Alaska in wintertime. So all of that, just food for thought there. Take that as it is. Now, as we look at hazardous weather today, something else that's pretty significant is the snow that's been falling around Haines and Skagway. If I understand right, Skagway has seen about 1 inch of snow an hour in some cases for the last 24 hours, and there are reports of snow maybe 6 feet deep in some places there at sea level, not up the road. Now up the road there's also been significant snow, enough so that the Klondike Highway is closed at this point because of avalanche danger, but also because of a fuel spill going on there. It sounds like 2 trucks, one of them a fuel truck, tried to get by each other. It didn't work out. And there's significant fuel spilled on the highway there, so that's closed, and there's avalanche danger. So that combined with the MV Matanuska, I guess, is certainly down for some repairs. So Skagway, you're going to have to hold on for a couple days, it looks like, as things kind of get sorted out. Get the shovels out, get the snow blowers out, and hunker down there and be careful. You will have some more opportunities for snow in the near future. Winter storm warning will be ending tonight, it looks like, for the region between about 6 and 9 o'clock in the northern parts of southeast. But winter weather advisories may come in right behind that because it looks like more snow's on the way. So prepare for that, hunker down, and we're all watching. Let us know what we can do. Out around Prince William Sound, South Central, things are fairly clear and dry right now. Haven't had a whole lot of snow moving through, but a large area of low pressure in the Gulf is going to be stirred up here in the next week. Before we get to that, I want to talk about most of the rest of the northern interior and the west coast. One exception here, everything you see on the map is a wind chill advisory. It means it's cold, right? It means there's air moving where it's already cold, and that feels like index could drop to about 45 below, maybe colder if the wind's a little bit stronger. The exception, that's the southern Brooks Range here. In this area here, a winter weather advisory is posted for blowing snow, reducing visibility as you're driving through the passes there around Arctic Village perhaps. You may be encountering some poor visibility under about a half mile at times there. Everything else is due to bad wind chills, 45 below or worse. So be careful. And that extends into southwestern Alaska along the coastlines too. Again, wind chill advisories there that could make it feel like 45 below or more. Here's a look at the satellite picture on this Sunday. You can see low pressure sitting here just outside of Prince William Sound, and that area of disturbed weather really stretches just south and west of Kodiak Island. A broad area of low pressure sits right up against southeastern Alaska, bringing up warm and wet air into northern parts there with the cold air in place. It has been snowing to beat the band. Whatever that means, it means that it's happening in a big way. A lot of snow there across northern and southeast, again up to 1 inch an hour in some parts of the northern panhandle. Out west, another decent area of low pressure working in from the North Pacific. You can see how that strong southeasterly sweep is moving into the central and western chain. Powerful low there, but really the main focus in town will be this low developing across the Gulf as we get into Monday night and Tuesday. And you'll see that here on the map in just a minute. Most of the rest of the interior is fairly dry. Ridge of high pressure off the Chukchi Peninsula in eastern Russia has this all under control. And there's not much going on there except for a little bit of snow falling around Fairbanks. It's fairly light, as I understand. Low deck, low ceiling there. You can see it on the FAA weather cams this afternoon. But most areas are not seeing any significant snowfall at this time. A little bit of light snow around the Alaska Peninsula, some snow and rain out across the central and western chain. That almost rhymes. And here's our front working into northern and eastern sections of the Gulf and southeastern Alaska. 2 areas of low pressure to focus on. One of these sort of in control at 984 millibars as that works northward tonight. No big change in its strength, but you can see the impacts of high pressure pushing into this area of low pressure. And as these black lines get crushed together, it tells us the winds are going to have to start moving around at a little bit more of a brisk pace. So a northerly flow coming down the inlet should be expected there. That's going to bring up the winds in places like the Matanuska Valley, the Knik Valley, all the way down into north and eastern parts of the Copper River Delta and parts of southeast, probably starting to pick up a little bit more of a breeze. That warm and wet air is still coming in, but it's not having as much of an impact at this point, so rain and snow showers may be possible, snow in the northern parts. As we get into Monday, high pressure is still in charge out west there, 1,031 millibars. You can see low pressure doesn't move very much here for your Monday, and behind that, another wave of strengthening low pressure as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday there. So in the meantime, snow showers continue across parts of southeast. Snow continues across the Copper River Valley. And then once you get west of that, it's really, really dry across the west, but it's also really cold. None of that seems to change. Areas of low clouds, fog, and flurries across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. And northerly flow continues to push in. Low deck of clouds across Utqiagvik all the way down to Wainwright and eastward, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. South of the range, you get into drier weather there. Maybe some passing snow showers or flurries around the Fairbanks area. South and west, blowing snow could pick up across the southwestern Capes. And as we get into Tuesday, you can see low pressure comes in from the south, strengthens and deepens to 946 millibars. Now, this is just the initial wave. As this works northward, the front pushes toward Kodiak Island, toward south central, and across the Gulf Coast. It will have warm and wet air wrapped into it, but that strong and steady south wind should start to make some more snow across northern parts of southeast. So that's what we're worried about for areas around Haines and Skagway for sure. Out across the southwest, snow showers continue there for the Bristol Bay region, the Alaska Peninsula, all the way into the eastern chain. High pressure still in control, and this is that big cold again, all feeding into south central. But many areas, especially from Seward into Whittier and Portage, Valdez, you're probably looking at wind, snow, and maybe some poor visibility and certainly some poor travel conditions as we get into the midweek. So pay attention to that and be careful. Here's a look at Monday morning temps. Southeast temps look like they will be in the 20s for Haines and Skagway and Yakutat. South of that, lower to mid 30s at or just above freezing. Prince William Sound in the teens. Cook Inlet looking at temps anywhere from 5 to 10 below. The Middle Tanana Valley 25 below. Bettles 45 below. 20 to 30 below across the North Slope. For Nome 18 below. Teens and 20s below zero for the southwestern Capes. King Salmon and Dillingham included. 12 above in Kodiak and single digits and teens for the Alaska Peninsula. Monday afternoon, above freezing for most of Southeast. Exceptions would be Haines and Skagway. Yakutat might reach 33. Cordova and Valdez in the 20s, single digits for Cook Inlet, 10 below for Golcana, 23 below for Fairbanks. Up north, well, looks like Arctic Village could make it to 28 below. Teens and 20s below zero for the North Slope, 13 below in Nome, 15 below in Kotzebue. Southwest looking cold.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And back with your aviation weather now. IFR will stretch out across the central and eastern Brooks Range and dip into the upper Yukon Valley, all the way into the Yukon Flats and just about south of the river itself. But once you get into the middle Tanana Valley and areas right up against the Alaska Range, we're expecting to see more widespread marginal concerns there. Across the north and eastern Gulf for most of the rest of the weekend and really a large part of the week to come, we're going to be dealing with widespread marginal conditions and likely terrain-induced IFR in areas on the northern end of this low pressure system. Looking at IFR, some of that could push into Prince William Sound from time to time. Out across the west, we'll see a little bit more of the slop bleeding in and around that area of low pressure from Kodiak Island and probably across the Pacific coastline of the Alaska Peninsula. Most of the west coast looks to be generally VFR through at least Sunday, probably into a good part of Monday, and then on and off throughout the week, but it's all going to depend on this area of low pressure here. Out across the west, other areas of low pressure working their way into the central and western chain will push moisture in from the south, so a totally different direction out west. You can see by Monday afternoon, again, we're still dealing with unsettled weather here across the Gulf. Marginal concerns across a large part of southeast, IFR across some of the higher terrain in southeast itself, around Hyder especially, and then Yakutat west into Prince William Sound, we're looking at IFR there. Across most of the west coast for Monday afternoon, VFR looks to hold for most of the day. Marginal concerns across the Brooks Range, IFR there working its way in across the central and western Beaufort Seacoast, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass included. Marginal across some of the eastern Alaska Range, and out west, widespread MVFR for most of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the Aleutian Chain, including St. Paul and St. George. By Tuesday afternoon, again, most of the west coast holds at VFR. Look for marginal concerns working their way into parts of St. Paul and St. George, the Alaska Peninsula into Kodiak Island, and most of the Gulf looking at marginal weather in the morning for Tuesday and along the higher train of southeast. IFR for Prince William Sound in the northern Gulf, and then a fairly widespread IFR across some of the eastern Brooks Range, all the way up toward Utqiagvik, east toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, and all the way down to the Yukon Valley. By the afternoon, some of that should lift. Looks like you'll see some VFR openings there for the eastern parts of the interior, the Alcan border, the upper Yukon, middle Tanana Valley, all the way really down through some of your Alaska Range passes. Out west, St. Matthew westward, marginal concerns there with VFR working its way into the central and eastern chain. Marginal weather there for areas from Sitkinak all the way out toward the Alaska Peninsula, Lake Iliamna, and south, all the way up through Cook Inlet, and then IFR across a large part of the Gulf with most of southeast maybe catching a break there, so perhaps some changes there. Here's your pass conditions in detail. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass in the Brooks Range looking to be marginal throughout most of your Monday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass in the western parts of the Alaska Range looking pretty good, but that's about where it stops. As you move northward, you get into Rainy Pass and Windy Pass looking to be at least marginal, maybe pushing over to IFR at times. Isabel Pass holding it marginal. As we get into Mentasta and the eastern Alaska Range, looking for marginal concerns there most of the day. Tanita Pass holds as you get down into parts of South Central. Again, looks to be marginal most of the day. Portage Pass should flip over by the end of the day. So if you're heading out into western parts of Prince William Sound, you're going to run into IFR concerns there that are developing throughout the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass may start at IFR in the northern parts of Southeast, but it looks like we'll at least see some improvement throughout the day toward marginal concerns. Now, as we get into freezing levels there, no question about it, we are under a lot of cold air. The surface freezing line stretches from the central Aleutians, takes a deep dive into the Gulf of Alaska, right up into parts of Cordova and Yakutat, and then on over into the higher terrain of southeast. The 2,000-foot elevated freezing line there south of Haida Gwaii and pushing into British Columbia. So icing concerns are really somewhat minimal, I guess, certainly not over most of the region. You can see some concerns growing here out across the central and western parts of the Aleutians below 6,000 feet. Across the northern Gulf, on the western side of low pressure, the levels are lower, below 3,000 feet. To the eastern side, we're getting below 7,000 to 8,000 foot levels there across most of southeastern Alaska, most of that holding around isolated moderate. The jet stream has a deep trough of low pressure, allowing that Arctic cold to hover over Alaska. The main quarter of fast-moving air, the jet stream across the northern Pacific there and out of reach of Alaska, so everything is kind of stuck in place right now. At 9,000 feet, here's our area of low pressure across the central parts of Alaska. Northerlies coming down the west coast, strong southerlies coming up through southeast, and high pressure anchored just south of the Gulf of Anadyr over eastern Russia there. Northerlies continue at 3,000 feet, 35 to maybe as strong as 45 knots there across the west coast. Northerlies coming in across the north slope, and southwesterlies coming into northern parts of southeast. That's really going to focus attention for turbulence, perhaps reaching isolated severe across the west coast below 4,000 feet. Widespread considerable moderate in the west and the chain and across northern parts of the Gulf. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery. Okay. We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off. In the satellite imagery, since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human, so the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time, so the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation-sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left-behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Dehne at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.dehne.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And we're back with a look at your sea ice update now. You can see ice continues to move southward there as it's growing with this cold flow off the continent. The white areas, of course, concentrations greater than 80%. The blue areas, the marginal ice zone below 80%. And it is still steadily moving toward St. Paul. Hasn't reached it there, and we don't have the forecast in there yet that it could reach St. Paul, but it does look like areas around St. Matthew in the next 5 days could see that marginal ice growth zone move toward St. Matthew and surround it there. So friends and family out there crabbing and working the edge, make sure they're careful and give them the very latest from the Alaska weather there. And of course, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the very latest position of that ice analysis each day. No big changes in Cook Inlet as we've seen today. For Monday, south and easterly winds will continue in southeast, those gusts reaching up to 35 knots on the interior in the Stevens Passage, and northerlies, or southerly winds I should say, moving north in Lynn Canal, 15 knots and 3-foot seas. They're the strongest winds and highest seas still out over the eastern Gulf, anywhere from 30 to 35 knots, 12 to 13-foot seas there. As we get into Tuesday, you can see winds coming up across the outer coast as that front is moving closer to land. And strong southeasterly winds will continue there. It looks like we'll see gusts up to about 35 knots around Stevens Passage. Southerlies in Lynn Canal come up a little bit more. 4-foot seas there. Southeasterlies in Clarence Strait, 30 knots, and 6-foot seas for Ketchikan, Metlakatla, and the surrounding area. For Prince William Sound, a northeasterly flow inside there, 25 knots, 6-foot seas. Southeasterlies coming into the outer islands, 30 knots, 13-foot seas. North and westerly winds will be strong coming down Cook Inlet and across the Kenai Fjords region and the Barrens, 25 to 35 knots. With seas ranging anywhere from 6 feet to 14 feet around the Barrens. And you can see as we get into Tuesday, that north flow continues over the ice. That will continue growth there across the central Cook Inlet region. 35 to 40 knots, though, with seas coming up 13 to 17 feet from the western Barrens north. And an east and northeasterly flow across the northern Gulf. Stronger winds coming into the outer portions of Prince William Sound, 35 knots and 12-foot seas. They're easterlies inside of the Sound with a 4-foot sea on 20-knot winds. Across Bristol Bay, north and westerly winds continue. Again, wind chill advisory is posted for the region. 30 knots out of the north and northwest, with ice in Bristol Bay. Down the coast, 12-foot seas. North and westerly winds over Kodiak Island and off of the bays and passes there, and the Capes for that matter. It is going to be a significant gust, and some of these areas will have some very localized but very strong gusts, some of those up to 60 knots potentially out of Chignik and Perryville. Look for 14-foot seas in some areas, 8-foot seas inside of Chillicothe Strait with that northwest wind. A little bit more of a northerly flow on Tuesday as the low center in the Gulf strengthens and repositions itself a little bit. Look for winds anywhere from 25 to 35 knots, 10 to 11-foot seas on the Pacific side, and 14-foot seas developing there across the Bering Sea coast as you head north of Cold Bay. For the chain, high pressure is in charge up north, but low pressure coming in across the west will draw in a broad east and southeasterly flow for most areas. You're looking at 30 knots in the east and 45 knots in the west, 21 to 22-foot seas expected, 10 to 19-foot seas across the Pacific, and anywhere from 13 to 18-foot seas across the central and eastern chain, seas up to over 20 feet out in the west for your Monday. Those come down just a little bit on Tuesday, anywhere from 30 to 35 knots in general for everyone. A north and easterly flow still under the effects of high pressure in the north, and you're looking at 15-foot seas there across the Bering, 16-foot seas in the west, and anywhere from 12 to 16-foot seas across the central and eastern chain. For the west coast, northerlies over the ice, anywhere from 20 to 30 knots, 35 knots in the Kuskokwim Delta, northeasterly flow into St. Paul and St. George with a 10-foot sea, northeasterlies there, 30 knots over St. Matthew with 7-foot sea on Monday. No big change on Tuesday, 35 knots and 13-footers there for St. Paul and St. George. Again, the ice edge slowly moving southward. No big change there around St. Matthew predicted just yet, 25 to 30 knots north of Nunivak Island, all coming in from the north. And then for the north slope, north and westerly winds 10 to 15 over the ice, northerlies over the Chukchi coast, 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. A little bit of a stronger flow as we get into your Tuesday, up to 25 knots north of Shishmaref on the Beaufort Sea coast, a north and westerly flow, 10 to 15 knots there for your Tuesday. Recapping tonight's weather, winter storm warnings continue in northern parts of southeastern Yakutat. Watch for those to fall off tonight as snow winds down for just a little bit of time, but winter weather advisories may come back for the northern parts of the Panhandle again, and that's after 24 hours of 1 inch an hour snowfall in areas around Skagway. The Klondike Highway is closed due to avalanche concerns and a fuel spill, and of course we know the ferry service is suspended. Watch for unsettled and stormy weather across the north and eastern Gulf Coast as we head through the next couple days. Low pressure continues to strengthen there as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, and very cold weather continues across the central, west, and southwest.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.